CSS has come a long way over the last 5 years, and as a mainly back-end developer, I've been trying to catch up on a lot of these changes. And I want to show something different in this video that we haven't shown before on the channel, and that's to take a raw HTML page that's unstyled and to create something nice from that page. And what we're going to create, as you can see on the screen at the moment, is a calendar view. And this page is going to use CSS Grid, and it's going to arrange the days of the week into a 7-column grid system, and then present this calendar where we have hover effects and transitions. And it's also going to be a responsive page, as we're going to see in the video. Now we're going to do this from entirely unstyled HTML. So if we go to the original content, this is the HTML page that we're going to get by default. And there's a GitHub link in the description with the starter code. So we're going to take this raw HTML content that's completely unstyled, and we're going to build it up step by step until we get this layout here, just by using CSS. Now there are different ways that we can do this, and if you have any better ways than the one we're about to present, feel free to open a PR on the GitHub repository, or to comment with some of your ideas below the video. Now before we get started, if you want to support the channel, we have this Ko-fi page, and it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much to everyone that's donated so far, and don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. And let's get started. So I've got the GitHub page open here, and it's a CSS calendar challenge. We have the starter code, so it's the index.html that's going to contain all of the starting HTML for this project. And then we have an empty styles.css file, and we're going to work through that in this video. And we're going to add new styles to styles.css throughout the video. Now let's take a look at the default page here, index.html, and you can see at the moment that this certainly doesn't resemble a calendar. This is for May 2024, and you can see the day names here, the abbreviation for those, and then the actual day number below here. So we've got a kind of style here that doesn't look anything like a calendar, and that's just using default styles. Now I'm going to open up VS Code where I have index.html here. And you can see we're loading in styles.css using a link tag. And below that we have a body, and that contains a div with a class of calendar. Now we're going to start styling this iteratively throughout the video, and we're going to start with the header, I think, after we give some basic styles to the body tag. And then we're going to move on and we're going to target the weekdays that we have here. And then if we scroll down, we have a day grid, and that's an ordered list that contains a bunch of li tags for the calendar. And that's basically all we need to know here. So we're going to get started with styles.css. Now what I want to do to start with is actually just target the body. And this is going to apply styles to the entire page. And what I want to do is give a background color, and I'm going to select a color here of dark slate gray. And let's also give it a color of white smoke, and that's going to be for the text that's going to be on the page here. Now once we've added those, let's go back to our page and let's refresh the page, and you can see that that has changed the background color to that dark slate gray, and we have the text now showing up as white on that darker background. And we can also change the font family here, so let's go back to styles.css, and I'm going to paste this in, and what we're going to do is prioritize the Georgia font. And we have a list here of fallbacks if that's not available. So let's try this out and go back to the page, and you can see that's changed the font. So we're going to start building up the calendar now. Let's start with the header that we have at the top. It says May 2024. Now if we look at the final version of this page, you can see that the header has a black background and it's centered, or at least the text is centered in the middle of that header. So let's start building that out, and of course, feel free to change any of the background colors and other aspects of this if you want. So in the index, you can see we have a header HTML element here. We're going to target that in the CSS file. So it's going to be the header element. Now the text was centered, so let's give it a text align of center here. And we've got a background color of black. So let's add that here. Now, if we save this and go back to our page here and refresh this, you can see we now have the text centered and a black background color. Now notice that we don't have a lot of padding here, so the text is right against the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is go back here to the header, and let's add the padding property, and we're going to give it a padding of 1 rem. And we can save this and again go back here, and you can see there's now more padding. Now one issue we've got is that if you look at the top here, you can see that this background for the header, it's not actually right against the edges of the page. Now that margin is actually coming from the default styles on the browser. Now what we can do is we can inspect the elements on the browser. So let's go to Developer Tools, and we're going to look at the body tag here. And if we go to the bottom, you can see at the bottom we have the styles that are applied in the box model of CSS. And you can see for the margin, there is a margin of 8 pixels on the body. Now we can override that and basically get rid of it by going to our body selector. And we're going to add a margin of 0 here. Now if we do that and save this, let's go back to the page, and I'm going to refresh this page, and you can see that gets rid of that margin that's added by the browser. So this header is now similar to what we have on this page here, and I think I'm slightly more zoomed in on this page. So if we go between the two pages, you can see the header looks the same. So what we're going to do now is we're going to target the weekdays that we have here in this list. So this is an unordered list, and it's got a class of weekdays. Let's have a look at that in the HTML. You can see it here, and within that unordered list we have an li element for each day of the week, and that starts from Sunday up to Saturday. Now each one of these is using the abbreviation element ABBR, and this represents an abbreviation or an acronym, and you can see that each one of these has a title attribute set to the full name of the day. Now what we want to do is we want to display each one of these day names in a row from left to right, as you can see on the page here. So we start with Sunday on the left hand side, and we have 7 days aligned here in columns from left to right. So in order to create this, we can use CSS Grid, and we can create a grid system with 7 columns. Let's see how to do that just now. So let's go back to VS Code, and we're going to target the UL with the class of weekdays. So in styles.css, let's add that selector there for the weekdays, and I'm going to scroll down here. And let's start by using display, and we're going to set it to grid. Now that on its own is not going to do anything because we need to actually define the structure of the grid. So if we go back to our page here and refresh, nothing has changed. So what we need to do is tell the grid system how many columns there are going to be in this grid. So I'm going to use grid template columns in order to do that. That's another CSS property. And what we can do is we can define one fractional unit. Now one fractional unit, 1FR, basically means that it's going to take up one part of the available space. So what we can do is we can add that 7 times here. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7. So we can add it like that, and we can save this and go back to the page. And you can see now we're getting the week abbreviations from left to right across 7 columns. Now this is quite repetitive and it's error prone, so there is a better way to do this. We can actually use the repeat function in CSS, and we want to repeat that 1FR 7 times. So that's the signature for that function. So the first parameter tells repeat how many times you want this to actually repeat, and we have the unit here, or the size, on the right hand side. Let's save this and go back to the page, and we can make sure that that's still displaying as we expect. So now that the weekdays are in one line and they're equally spaced out, what we can do is we can style the text inside of that element. So let's increase the font size to match what we have here, and we're also going to make it bold. And finally, we'll align the text that we have here in the middle of each container. So we need to go back to styles.css, and we're going to go back to this selector for the weekdays. So what we're going to do is start by adding a font weight of bold, and we want to make the font size bigger, so we're going to set a font size of 1.25 rem. And finally, to center that text within the container, we can use the justify items property, and we're going to set that to center. So let's save this, and we'll go back to the page, and when we refresh this page, you can see the text is now bold and the font size is larger, and we have centered those items in the middle of the container. Now by default, li elements like these under an unordered list, they are prefixed with the small circle that you see on the page here, and that's as opposed to ordered lists where the prefix is a number. So just to quickly demonstrate that, I'm going to change the unordered list to an ordered list, and if we go back here, we're going to see that that changes from the circle, the bullet point, to the number. Now we want to go back to an unordered list, and we want to get rid of these styles here. We don't want this bullet point to appear at each element. Now we can do that very easily. We go back to the weekdays that we have here, and in fact what we can do is we can target all li elements in the page, and we can give it a list style of none. And that's going to remove the bullet points that we see at the top here, and it's also going to remove the numbers that you see on the left hand side. So if we refresh this page, you can see that those are now gone. And what we're left with on the left from top to bottom here is the day names, or rather the day numbers. At the top, we have the abbreviated day names. And similarly, we might want to remove the underline from the day names. And again, very easy to do that. So let's go back here. If we go to index.html, we're going to target the abbreviations. And what we're going to say here is we want to remove the underline. And we can say text decoration, that's the property. We can set that to none. Again, let's go back and save this, and you can see that it's removed those lines. So we're now building this up. We have a 7-column grid system for the day names, and we've centered that text within the container. Now obviously we're getting just the abbreviations here. What we want to do is we want to go back to have the full day names and only show the abbreviations on smaller screens like this. We're going to do that slightly later in the video. Let's now style the day numbers, and that's the day grid class if we go back to index.html and we scroll down. So we now have an ordered list with a class of day grid. So we're going to copy that class and we're going to create a selector for that here in styles.css. Now again, very similar to what we had for the weekdays, we want to create a CSS grid system with 7 columns. So I'm going to copy those classes or those properties and we're going to paste them into this, and let's go back and save this, and you can see we're now getting them kind of lining up, but we've still got quite a lot to do to make it look like this. So let's continue on here. Now we have the 7 columns. That's important because we need that for 7 days of the week. But we're now going to try and style the li elements within the day grid. So if we go back to index.html, we have the ordered list with the class of day grid, and that has the li elements within it. So what we're going to do is we're going to target those now. So let's go back to styles.css, and we're going to copy this selector, and we're going to get the child li tags. Now, how should we approach this? Let's go back to the calendar that's finished. We're going to add a border, and you can see that there's a white border here. And notice as well, it's kind of rounded, so we're going to add a border radius. Let's start with those. So we're going to add a border property, and we want the border to be 1 pixel and a solid border. And finally, for the color, I'm going to select white smoke. And then we can use border radius, that's a CSS property. And if we set that to 3 pixels, what we can do is go back and have a look at this. So now you can see we have the border and a slight border radius applied to each of those. Now obviously we want to set the height to be a bit larger than what we see here, something that's going to match this. So what I'm going to do is go back to this selector that we have here, and we're going to use the height property here, and what I'm going to set that to is 10 VH. Now VH stands for viewport height, and 10 VH basically means 10% of the viewport height. So we're going to set the LIs within the day grid to 10% of the viewport height. And if we refresh this, you can see we now get different heights, and that looks a bit better. Now, one thing you might notice that's weird here, or it's not right, is that we have some space on the left-hand side, but not on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is go to inspect the elements on this page, and we're going to target the ordered list with the class of day grid. And I'm going to go down to the computed styles here, and let's look at the bottom. Now the one I want to look at is the padding that's applied here to the ordered list element by default in the browser. You can see that is highlighted on the page here at the left hand side. That's a padding of 40 pixels. So we're going to remove that from our ordered list. So let's go back to the CSS file, and it's the one with the class of day grid. That's the ordered list in the HTML file. We're going to add a padding property to that. And on the y-axis, I'm going to set the padding to 0, and on the x-axis to 1 rem. Now, if we save that and go back to the page and close this off, when we refresh the page, you can see that we have a slight bit of padding at the left and the right now, and it looks more uniform. So there's 1 rem of padding at each side of the x-axis. Now that's also thrown the alignment of these weekdays at the top out of sync, and that's because the same padding is present. So let's go back to our class of weekdays, and if we look at index.html, that's the unordered list that we have here. So we can reset the padding for that element as well. So let's add a padding here, and what I'm going to do on the y-axis, and that's the top and the bottom, is set 0.5 rem. So we're going to give it a little bit of padding on the y-axis, and we're going to match that 1 rem of padding on the x-axis, and that should bring it back in line with the center of these boxes, as you can see here, and it's added a little bit of padding on the y-axis as well. So now the top grid for the weekdays and the other grid for the week numbers are aligned here. What we want to do next is add some space between the grid items that we have here below and the grid for the week numbers. Now CSS grids, they have a gap property that allows you to evenly space out grid items. So that's what we're going to add, and we're going to do that on the class of .weekdays here. So we can add a gap property, and I'm going to set that to 0.5 rem. Now that's going to be applied if we save this to the weekdays at the top here. But what we're also going to do is apply that to the week numbers. So we need to target the day grid here, and that's the one that has display grid. And we're going to paste that class in here as well and save the file. And let's go back to the page, and you can see we now have some spacing between the grid items. Now importantly, we want to center these numbers within the bordered containers, just as you can see on this page here. So let's get started with that. So for each li element, we want to center the text essentially. So we're going to target this element here, and we're going to add a text align property and set that to center. Let's see if that worked. We go back to the page here, and you can see that the text is centered. Now that's centered them horizontally at least, but of course we want to center that vertically as well. And we can change the vertical alignment of the grid element's children by using the align content property. So if we go back here to the li selector, we're going to select Align Content, and we're going to set that to Center. And what that's going to do is center the text on the cross axis, and that's from top to bottom on the column axis, and it's going to center that within the container. So that's looking quite good. If we go back to this page here for the finished version, you can see though that we have some highlighting going on for the actual days that are belonging to the month. And there's also some days that don't belong to the month that retain the background color of the body tag. Now we want to change the background color for all of these days to this color that you see here. So let's get started with that. What we're going to do is go back to VS Code and go to index.html, and I'm going to scroll down to the day grid. Now you can see all of the days of the month, they're just li tags. They don't have the class of month previous or the class of month next. So we're going to set a white background for any li tags that do not have these classes here and also fall within this day grid. Now we can use the _CSS pseudo class in order to target the li elements that don't have a class of month previous or month next. Let's see how to do that just now. If we go back to styles.css, we're going to add a new selector at the bottom here. So again, we're going to look at the day grid, and we're going to look at the li elements in that day grid, but we're only interested in the ones that don't have the class of month previous or month next. So we add the two selectors into this not pseudo class, and basically this selector is going to match all li elements that are children of the day grid but don't have these classes. Once we've done that, we can add a background color of white smoke as we did before, and we're also going to add a color for the text within those to be dark slate grey. So we're setting the background and the color. Let's go back to the page here and refresh, and you can see that that has colored only the items that are part of the month. And actually, I think I've made a mistake somewhere here. At the bottom right, we have the next day of the next month. So we need to also make sure that that's the color of these here, and that's just the default color of the body. So let's go back to the selector that we have here. And I think I added month previous twice. The one for the bottom should be month next. So let's fix that up just now and go back to our page. And when we refresh, the bottom right box here is now the same background color as these at the top left. So we only have the white background color when the day belongs to the given month. So that represents quite a nice way to use the not pseudo class in CSS to target particular elements that do not have one of these selectors specified in the brackets here. Now to finish the video, we're going to add some styles to make this a little bit more responsive. If we look at the page just now and we make this smaller, you can see that it does actually resize quite nicely, and that's because CSS Grid is actually very flexible with this, and it works quite well out of the box already, and it retains that calendar look on smaller screen sizes. So the only change I want to make is to not show this abbreviated name on larger screens, but to actually show the full day name, such as Sunday and Monday. And then when the screen size is reduced below some threshold, we're going to go back to this default of showing the abbreviation. Now what we can do is go back to the HTML file here, and we're going to go up to the weekdays that we have here, and you can see that each weekday is an abbreviation tag, and the abbreviation is part of the element, but the title attribute here has the full name of the day. So we're going to extract the full day name, and we're going to show it using the before pseudo element. So let's go back to styles.css, and what I'm going to do at the bottom here is look at the abbreviations, and we're going to use the before pseudo element, and the content for that is going to be an attribute on the element, and that's going to be the title attribute. So just by adding that CSS here, we can go back to our page and refresh, and you can see the full day name is now showing up, and that's showing up before the default content of the abbreviation element. So now that we have this, we can selectively show and hide the abbreviation and the full day name depending on the size of the screen, and we're going to create a media rule for that. So let's go back to our CSS file, and I want to move this into a media query, so let's define that just now. So on all screens, and when the minimum width is set to 1000 pixels here, let's open the selector, and we're going to move this content into that. And what this means is that the full day name is only going to show up on screens that have a minimum width of 1000 pixels. So let's save this and test it out. If we go back to the page here, we can still see that appearing here, but when we go to smaller screens, we only get the abbreviation. So that part of it's working, but we need to remove the character here, the abbreviated character, from the end of these day names on the larger screen sizes. So we can play with the visibility property in CSS and toggle between visible and hidden values. And that's going to allow us to achieve this effect. So let's go back to our CSS file. Now what I'm going to do is bring the abbreviation styles down to the bottom, just so that I can easily work with them. And we're going to paste that above the media query. Now the styles that we define outside the media query are going to be the defaults, and they can be overridden when the screen size hits 1000 pixels or above. So by default, what we want to do is we want to make sure the abbreviated text is visible. So we're going to set a visibility property to visible here. And we want to get rid of this before content. So what we're going to do is copy that and I'm going to paste it in here. And what I'm going to do here is change the visibility to hidden. So let's set that here to hidden. And then when the screen size hits 1000 pixels, we're going to show the content of the full day name, and that's going to be in the before pseudo element. And then what we want to do is hide the default. So let's take the abbreviation element here and we want to hide that on these larger screens. So let's set a visibility and set it to hidden. And finally, because we've set a visibility of hidden on the before pseudo element, when we hit the larger screens, not only do we want to set the content, but we also want to set it to visible, so we can do that here as well. Let's now save this and go back to the page and refresh the page, and you can see by default it's showing the full day name, and that's because my default screen size is larger than 1000 pixels. So these styles here are going to come into effect. But if we go to smaller screens, the pseudo element, the before pseudo element is going to be hidden, and it's going to go back to the abbreviated content. So that's now toggling between the abbreviation and the full day name based on the screen size. And we can do that using simple media queries and also by using visibility property in CSS. Now there's a small issue with simply setting the visibility to hidden on the abbreviation element. So on larger screens this is going to be applied, and I don't know if you can see that above here, but it's slightly off center. So the weekday names at the top, they're slightly off center, and that's because the visibility property is only specifying whether an element is visible or not, but the property does not affect the layout of the element. The element is still there, it's just not visible on the page. Now what we can do is right click this and inspect this on Developer Tools, and I'm going to make this smaller here. And if you look at this abbreviation element, you can see the highlighting on the screen, and that abbreviated form, just the M for Monday, you can see that it's still there on the page. Now that's messing up the alignment here because it makes the text for Monday that's actually visible slightly off center at the top. Now I'm going to employ a quick hack to fix this. So let's go back to VS Code. And what we're going to do is we're not only going to make the element invisible on larger screens, but I'm also going to set a font size to 0. Now as well as that, I'm going to set a font size on the before pseudo element here to 1.25 rem. And if we save that and go back to the page, you can see now that it's centered. And if I inspect the element here and go to the abbreviation, you can now see that the abbreviated T has a text size of 0. So it doesn't really affect the width of that particular text. Now that we have that, we're going to add one final thing here, and that's a hover effect. And you can see that on the final website here. When we hover over one of the day names, it's got that hover effect. So we're going to add that as a final step here using CSS. So first of all, what we want to happen here when we hover over these is we want the day element to change color. We also want to increase the roundness of the corners. Now let's look at the other side here. You can see the roundness is increasing there slightly, and we're also scaling up slightly when the mouse moves over the day number. Now we can add these interactive effects through the hover pseudo class. So let's go back to VS Code, and what we're going to do is just go above the media query here. And in fact, let's locate the day grid that we have. Now we've got the styles here for the li tag within the day grid. I'm going to copy these and we're going to go to the line below, and this time we're going to apply the hover pseudo class, and we're going to add some styles here on hover. Now let's start by changing the background color when we hover. So I'm going to copy the normal style for this, and we're going to change it from white smoke to black, and let's test that that's working by going back to the page. So I'm back on the page here, and when I'm hovering over these, you can see it's not actually working, but it does work for the ones that are not that white smoke color. So in other words, the days that are not part of the month that are white as a background color, these are getting the correct background color on hover, and you can see that at the bottom right as well. Now what I'm going to do is just add an important flag here to this class that we've got here, or rather to this style, this hover style. So I'm going to do that just now. We're going to add the important declaration, and then we can go back here and we're going to find that it now works when we refresh the page. Now, I'm not sure why that happened. It didn't work when I was preparing the content. So if you're aware of why this is happening and you know a better solution than using important, let us know in the comments. What we're also going to do is increase the border radius. Now, if we look at the normal border radius of these li elements, it's 3 pixels. So what we're going to do is we're going to make that 6 pixels on hover. Let's go back to the page and again refresh, and you can see that the styles, the border radius styles here, are increasing when we hover over the element. So it's giving that effect, but we also want to scale it up slightly when we hover. So we're going to go back to the CSS file here, and let's add a transform attribute here. So we're going to transform this li element, and we're going to scale it up. So let's use the scale function, and we want to scale it up by 5%. So we're going to make it 105% of the original size. Now, if we save that and go back to the page, you can see that when we hover over this, it's increasing the size. And if you're not seeing that, let's try increasing this even more. If we make it something a bit larger, like 1.55, let's go back here, and this time you can see it's very much increasing the size there. That's far too big for the effect we're going for, but it's just showing that this is working, and we're going to change it back to 1.05. Now, I think I realized why this important had to be added, so I'm actually going to remove that and test this out, and I'm going to move the hover styles just below the styles that come here for the li tags. So I'm going to move that down below here, and the reason for that is due to specificity. These have the same specificity, so whatever one is declared last is going to be applied. We want the hover styles to come after the original styles for the li. Now, if I save this and we go back to our page here, you can see that now the background color is being applied, and we don't need to rely on that important declaration. So let's finish here by adding a different text color. Now, if we hover over these, it turns the background color to black, but notice that the text here is remaining the same color. So for the day number, for example, 8 or 9, we want to change that, and we're going to make the text white. So let's go back to VS Code, and what we're going to do on the hover style is we're going to add another property, and that's the color property, and we're going to set that to white smoke. Let's save this and go back to the page and refresh, and you can see now when we hover over a given grid container, a grid element, it's going to change the text color in there to white. Now, one thing to notice is that when we hover over an element, the transform is applied immediately. Now, we can smooth out that transition by specifying the time that the transition should take to complete, and we can do that by using the transition property in CSS. So let's go back to the CSS file, and we're going to go up to the styles for the day grid li tag. Now, what I'm going to do here is add a transition property to the li tag, and for all transitions, we're going to take 0.3 seconds, and we're going to use ease out. Now, ease out is the transition timing function, and this means that it's going to start transitioning very quickly, and it's going to slow down as the transition continues. And if you want that transition to occur at an even speed over the 0.3 second transition duration, you can use the linear timing function, but we're going to keep it as ease out. And let's go back to our page. I'm going to refresh this page. And this time when we hover over, you can see that that is applying that transition. It's taking 0.3 seconds, and all of the styles are coming in gradually, so it creates that small animation effect. And we're finally done here, so thank you very much for watching. What we've done in this video is we've transformed a very simple HTML template that was unstyled, and we've transformed it into this calendar view, and this is a responsive view, so when we go to smaller screens, you can see that all of the styles are still working, and the look and feel of the calendar is maintained as we get to the smaller screen sizes. And throughout this video, we've learned how to use CSS Grid to create a 7-column system, 1 column for each day of the week. And we've enhanced the user experience by adding these hover effects and using transitions to ensure that we have some smooth animations as we hover over these elements. Now, I know this has been a different type of video for the channel, but if you want to see more of these CSS and design type videos, let me know in the comments. It's something I might like to do occasionally. And if you want to support the channel, we've got a Ko-fi link in the description. It would be greatly appreciated, and thank you very much to everyone who's donated on Ko-fi. And finally, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want more of this content. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.